Hello and welcome to Le Col. I'm Chris Opie, and in this video I'm going to be coaching you through a 100-mile bike ride. By the end of this video, you will feel confident enough to tackle your first 100-mile bike ride, your first century, or 161 kilometers. If you've done it before and it's a more regular occurrence, you'll have more knowledge to help you get more out of the experience each time you do it in the future. Riding your first century is a natural milestone if you come from the imperial world. If you live in a metric world, however, you'll probably be questioning why on earth have we chosen 161 kilometers when your natural markers may well be 150 kilometers, 100 kilometers, or even 200 kilometers. But for the sake of this video, we'll stick with 160 kilometers because that is the recognized century world ride and is a natural target for many bike riders. When planning a big ride, I like to give myself around a week's notice. This enables me to tailor my training slightly, to ease up in the days leading up to the ride to make sure I'm not too fatigued. It also enables me to be slightly flexible with the day that I'm going to do the ride. Imagine it's going to rain on the Saturday, but the Sunday's beautiful weather. Of course, I prefer to do the ride on the Sunday if at all possible. It also allows me to plan my nutrition a little bit better. I can eat a little bit more on the Friday and on the Saturday in preparation for the big calorie drain on the Sunday century ride. If this is your first century ride, chances are it's not a spontaneous event. What I mean by that is it's highly unlikely that you've woken up on a Saturday or Sunday morning and thought to yourself, I quite fancy riding 100 miles today. So let's start at the planning stage. If you're an inexperienced cyclist and it's your first ever 100-mile ride, I don't recommend choosing a brutally hilly, windy route. Instead, try and find a route that's more appropriate for your experience level. Find something with a few more undulations in the road rather than steep, brutal climbs, and find roads that aren't too exposed to the wind. This is quite easy to do. There are plenty of planning apps out there which can help you choose your route, and using the weather forecast will make this a lot easier as well. If it's your first ever century ride, you may find it beneficial to plan several local apps that never take you too far away from home. That way, you kind of have this get out of jail free card towards the end of the ride, should the worst happen, and you either suffer from the hunger knock or just extreme fatigue at that 80-mile mark. It's no fun knowing that you're 4 hours away from home and you have no idea how you're going to get back, and you make the phone call of shame to whoever it is waiting for you at the other end. If you're a more experienced rider though, then why not try and plan a route that takes you 3 or 4 hours away from home into some really big hilly terrain. Make it a real challenge. That's a great way to build in a little bit of progression into this sort of session. And then there's one final consideration when it comes to your planning, and that's your timing. There's no point planning a 6-hour bike ride and leaving at 8 if you know you need to be somewhere at 2:30 in the afternoon. Give yourself enough space to have a little bit of wriggle room should something go wrong on the ride. That way you'll enjoy it more and you won't feel stressed as that time barrier fast approaches you towards the end of the ride. Allow yourself the full day, really enjoy the experience and get the most out of it. You don't want to feel rushed. A second ago, I touched on nutrition and the fact that you could afford to eat a little bit more in the days leading up to your big century ride. But what does that look like? Well, scientifically speaking, you could eat 8 to 10 grams per kilogram of body weight of carbohydrates in the day leading up to the event. That's quite a lot of food. For someone weighing my weight, that's almost a kilo of carbohydrates. It's going to be quite hard to consume that much food. So we recommend breaking that down into 6 to 8 smaller meals across the day, and then making sure you top up with a really good breakfast on the day of the event, consuming over 1,200 calories before your big ride. You also need to make sure you're including enough protein, around 20 to 30 grams per meal time in the day before the event and on the morning of the event. But when it comes to the ride itself, you're going to want to really think about your fueling strategy. Don't just think to yourself, I'm going to eat loads of Haribo and sugary treats throughout the day. It's going to be really difficult to start to consume that because you'll have palate fatigue as the day wears on. Instead, consider some savoury foods, some nice snacks, homemade flapjacks, sandwiches, the sort of thing you can normally find in your local village shop. That's going to make it much more enjoyable. Eating normal, natural foods is also going to be that little bit easier on your palate and your digestive system. One important thing to consider is your hydration. No matter what time of the year it is, you can afford to drink around 500 millilitres per hour of fluid. And the best way to do this is consuming an electrolyte drink because it will be more easy for your body to absorb the fluid and to rehydrate your system. If it's cold, you'll be expelling plenty of moisture into the air, through breathing, and if it's warm, you're going to be sweating. So make sure you've thought that out and you can carry enough fluid. Obviously, if you're going to be riding for 6 to 8 hours, it's going to be quite hard to carry that much with you, so you will need to schedule a stop somewhere where you know you can top up with some fresh fluids. If you're sat there watching this thinking that I've heavily featured carbohydrates in my nutrition breakdown, you're right, and there's good reason for that. Whilst I recognise there are alternatives and they deserve a completely separate video on their own, carbohydrates are a readily available energy source, muscle fuel, great for providing simple, quick and effective energy to get you through your 100-mile ride. We're now into pacing, which happens to be one of my favourite aspects of cycling. Learning how to pace your ride, whether that's a time trial, a hill climb, or indeed a 100-mile century ride, is one of the best ways and the most effective ways to help you get more out of your riding. When it comes to approaching the 100-mile ride, we recommend starting out purely in an endurance capacity. That means no hard efforts. So even if it is hilly at the start or if it is windy, ease off on the pedals. For the first 2-3 hours, your legs really shouldn't be hurting. After that, and as you get towards the end, you can start to up the intensity ever so slightly if you have something left in the tank. This is more important if it's your first century ride. And if you are a more experienced rider, then you can afford to be slightly more aggressive with your pacing strategy. I don't mean go out and ride up every climb as fast as possible in the first 2 hours, but you can increase the tempo towards the end of the ride. Perhaps if you have a catalogue of rides before, you can try and beat the previous average speed that you set on those century rides. On the whole, I still believe that a negative pacing strategy is the best way to approach any sort of ride or effort. That means the second half is always going to be slightly more intense or faster than that first half, sparing your energy earlier on in the ride to expel it later on. It's going to be a recipe for success and, generally speaking, enjoyment, knowing that you can go that little bit harder when you're in touching distance of getting home. Setting yourself intermediate targets throughout the ride is an effective way to increase your chance of success. Time or distance goals, be that 2, 4 or 6 hours, or even 25, 50 and 80 miles. Even a geographical landmark such as a great view or your favourite cafe. Breaking the ride down into manageable chunks will create progressive targets to help you achieve little goals along the way to completing the big 100 miles. I have 3 extra considerations that I'd like to share with you. Number 1, clothing. If you're going to ride a century, you're going to be out of the house for quite a long period of time. If you live in the UK, the weather changes throughout the day. The temperature can be quite cool in the morning and it can warm up quite a lot in the afternoon. Equally, if you don't leave until midday, you're going to be cooling off towards the end of the ride, meaning layering, spare clothing, something small that you can tuck away in your back pocket or in a frame bag is going to make the ride that little bit more enjoyable. Number 2, the simple act of sharing your live location or at least your return home safely with somebody I think is a really good idea. Plenty of things can go wrong on a bike ride, especially one that takes over 6 to 8 hours. Therefore, letting someone know that you've made it home safely and you've had a fantastic day out is a really sensible idea. And my final top tip is not one that I would apply to every single ride that I go out on, but carrying more spares than you think you could possibly need, more money than you think you could possibly need, and more food and drink than you could possibly need is the best way to ensure success on a long day out in the saddle. I really hope you found these tips useful and they help you get more out of your century rides. Please do share your experiences with us because we'd love to hear about them. That's it from me. I'll see you again next time.